We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor, as well as this week by Danielle Beck, who handles tax issues for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And Danielle, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for starters, obviously the news of the week, of the months really in Washington is efforts on the part of Democratic leadership on Capitol Hill to pass a reconciliation package. We've seen some details emerge of it this week, some of those subsets of that $3.5 trillion bill. I wonder, just to start out here, we did see some committee action on things like the agriculture provisions, the healthcare provisions, the tax provisions. Wondering if we can zoom out and maybe not look at specific titles, but zooming out, your overall impression of how this bill could shape the priorities of NCBA in the cattle industry.
Our message to Congress from day one has been pretty clear, and that's do no harm when it comes to our nation's agricultural producers. When you're looking at $3.5 trillion worth of initiatives that need to be paid for with potentially $1.8 trillion in tax hikes, the tax code is really critical. It can make or break an agricultural producer when it comes to not only their annual tax burden, but their ability to pass their operation on to the next generation of producers. And so when you're looking at how to implement the American Families Plan, we've asked Congress to remember that our nation's agricultural producers are families too. They're family-owned businesses, and they need a tax code that really works for them.
Danielle, thanks again for being on. Obviously, one of the biggest issue, tax issue going into this week was whether the Democrats would pick up on President Biden's proposal to start taxing capital gains at death, essentially nullifying the benefit of stepped-up basis, which farms obviously use to a great extent for estate planning. It's not in the House bill. There's still some Senate Democrats who are talking about wanting to address this issue, though. But given the opposition from some rural Democrats, can we be fairly confident that this issue is dead?
I wouldn't say that we're there quite yet. We are not willing to ease up on the gas until we are fully confident that stepped-up basis is going to be preserved moving forward. Part of this conversation, at least it's my understanding, that a lot of Democrats in the House have said, they're not willing to take tough votes on issues like stepped-up basis unless they know there's alignment on an overall spending number. And we're hearing reports this week that Senator Manchin is one of those individuals who's drawn a line in the sand. He's not willing to vote for a bill that potentially costs more than $1.5 trillion. The pay-fors that they've identified, if the spending is less, the pay-fors will need to be less, obviously. But at the same time, there are a lot of Democrats, especially those in the progressive side of the party, that really want to impose their will and maybe don't understand or appreciate fully the need for stepped-up basis in our industries. We sent a very clear message to Capitol Hill as part of the Tax Aggie Coalition. That was an effort I was really proud to spearhead, in which more than 300 different food and agriculture trade associations from across the country sent a very clear message of do no harm, do not touch, fully preserve stepped-up basis. And we feel like that message was received loud and clear, at least in the House. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, but we're not counting our chickens before the eggs have hatched.
There was a new issue that cropped up in this tax package that came out of the House Ways and Means Committee this week, though, and that was a cut in the estate tax exemption from about $11.7 million back to $5 million, what it was previously before it was raised by Republican Congress. What's the impact of that?
NCBA has always supported full permanent repeal of the estate tax, or the death tax as we refer to it. The relief that was provided under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a huge boon to the industry, but it's important to keep in mind that that was not a permanent provision. We know that the estate tax exclusion limits are set to revert back in 2026. We were not pleased to see that the exclusion limits would revert back immediately because we know that it takes about 1,500 acres on average to hit that $5 million exemption limit or cap. That impacts a lot of farms. You know, it's about 200,000 farms that would be impacted, at least from the data that I've seen. That said, there was also a provision by the Democrats that was supposed to provide a little bit of relief. It's the 2032A special use valuation, and that's an effort that NCBA has been spearheading for quite some time now.
Yeah, we'll pick up on that. The special use valuation essentially allows you to reduce the value of your estate for tax purposes if you're a farm or a business. I believe it applies to both the land, your real property. I've seen it suggested that this could be better than the state tax exemption itself in terms of the benefit to farms and ranches. What's your assessment of it? I believe they increased that limit to $11.7 million. Does that totally offset the reduction in the state tax exemption? Could it even be better?
You know, it could. It really depends on your situation. You know, one of the arguments we've made since day one, again, on the stepped up basis issue, is that no two family farms look alike, nor is the definition of family as narrow as you find in the federal tax code. You know, stepped up basis is a perfect example of a very narrowly defined family unit. It's lineal descent, grandparent to parent to child. And 2032A does represent a meaningful opportunity for producers to potentially lower their estate tax burden. But there are a number of parameters around that provision of the code that really must be satisfied in order to effectively make that election and reap the full benefits. We are thrilled to see that the Preserving Family Farms Act, which was spearheaded by Representatives Panetta and Walorski, were included in the House proposal. We think, though, that there are several other adjustments that could be made that really would allow more agricultural producers to reap the benefits there.
Is this going to make it easier for Congress to ultimately lower the estate tax exemption?
That is one risk, but that is not our intended goal. The estate tax exclusion limits, are something that we would like to see made permanent under the current law, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act law. We need 10 million per individual, 20 million per couple, indexed for inflation. Given the extreme inflation in land values, rising land values across the country, there are a number of producers who can very easily exceed today's exclusion limits, not just those proposed 5 and 10 million ones that the House is looking at. 2032A works for some producers. It doesn't work for everybody. There are also a lot of other risks. If you are a forester, for example, harvesting timber as a capital asset counts as a disposition of your sale or your operation, and then you could trigger potentially a recapture by the IRS. A sale of a conservation easement counts as a disposition of an asset and triggers a recapture there. If something goes awry in your 9 out of 10, you potentially owe the IRS any benefit you've previously taken. And on top of that, when you elect for 2032A, the IRS issues a lien on your property, meaning there's an impact to your credit worthiness. When there's a lack of capitalization in agriculture across the board, any additional barriers or restrictions to credit is something that you're going to have to really weigh carefully when you're deciding whether or not 2032A is a good fit for you. It works for some, it doesn't work for everybody, and that's why we're going to continue fighting, 1, for full permanent repeal of the death tax, but 2, at the very least, permanency with the TCJA limits.
Danielle, obviously, we've drilled down quite a bit on some of the specific tax language that's being discussed right now, but kind of want to zoom out and look at sort of the broader congressional agenda, because we've got this $3.5 trillion reconciliation package. We've got this infrastructure package that House moderates are saying they'd like to vote on and here toward the end of September. On top of that, there's the debt limit increase. There's some kind of government funding mechanism that needs to happen by the end of the month. I'm wondering, from the chair that you're sitting in, can you kind of handicap the next couple of weeks? I mean, what does the rest of September look like, knowing that Congress has this kind of loaded agenda that they need to tackle here?
I'll tell you, I'm really grateful to be sitting in this chair right here than a chair in the Cannon House office building. That's for sure. There are there's a lot to get done in the coming weeks and very little time to accomplish that. But, Spencer and Phil, just as well as I do, that Congress often operates like a bunch of college students, and they wait until the last night before the deadline to begin writing their term paper. It looks like rules may be meeting on some sort of continuing resolution on Monday. The length of that CR remains to be seen. You may have more information than I do at this point, but there are a lot of really critical provisions. Today, we were talking about, what happens if there is a lapse in livestock mandatory reporting authority at the same time that there is a lapse in government funding. In previous administrations, those reporting activities may not have been qualified essential activities. How do those two issues intersect? They are critically important issues that we are continuing to look at, along with everything else that is happening in Congress right now. I mean, it is really, really important that Congress put sound policy, good governance before politics at this point in time, because there is so much at stake. And with as much as there is on the line right now, I think we're just hopeful that everybody can work together to figure out how to get things done in a short period of time.
Well, members are coming back to Capitol Hill next week for what one can assume will be, again, an action-packed couple of weeks, a number of things on the congressional agenda. We'll be sure to keep an eye on all of those at agripulse.com. But Danielle, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me again.
For Danielle Beck and Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.